Now that The Hobbit was planned for release in December of 2012, 1 year later than planned because of setbacks that I went over in the last video, the hype was building. It was all of our chances to escape back into the world of Middle-earth. Most fans, including myself, came into seeing The Hobbit with probably the highest of expectations, which is usually not a good thing because the movie doesn't always live up to the hype. My first impressions of the first scene were, wow, this looks really weird, as it was our first time seeing a movie or anything at 48 FPS. It looked super distracting and I never got used to it even by the end. I mean, I guess Jackson's explanation of why he used the high frame rate makes a lot of sense.
I've been intrigued about high frame rates for a long time because 24 frames a second is a speed that the industry has sort of locked into since 1927. And all the mechanical cameras and projectors that were ever built in the last, what's that, 80, 90 years, were just made to shoot at 24 frames a second. But with the advent of digital cameras and projectors, you don't have to do that anymore. And so I was thinking, well, why are we still shooting films at 24 frames? It does flicker, it does strobe, it does blur. And I think we have to up the bar. We have to raise the bar as filmmakers to attract audiences back in for that big screen experience. And I think things like frame rates, 3D, incredible size screens, improved sound systems, we have to keep pushing it because we need to keep getting people back into the cinemas again.
I really don't know if I got used to the 48 frames by the end or if he had completely mastered it, because I didn't notice the frame rate at all by the last movie and it added a cool effect to all the fight scenes. And now I honestly think that people should start making all movies in this type of style. I mean, someone had to jumpstart the high frame rate era with a high budget film in this style. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard somewhere that Avatar, the second movie, was going to be filmed in 60 FPS, but I'm not sure. Although I'm pretty sure Jackson got the 48 FPS down by the last movie, it still looked strange in the beginning, and it had this kind of fake look to it that Lord of the Rings didn't have. It also had this like super intense color correction and a harsh bloom effect that made it look like you were in a dream the whole time, which I get considering it is a story told by Bilbo. When you get into the movie, it just feels like the present and not the past. Interestingly enough, Philippa Boyens revealed in 2012 that Del Toro's movie would seem more like a fairy tale. Jackson came along and said that they couldn't come at these movies like that because they had already established what the world looked like and felt like in Lord of the Rings.
Well, I mean, I always thought that The Hobbit was written in such a particular style that Tolkien, he wrote it like a children's bedside story. It was always going to be very difficult to adapt because it's just such a different. It's connected to the Lord of the Rings, but it's such a different sort of a way of telling the story, and it always made me nervous. I mean, it really made me kind of unsure about how to do it, and it wasn't really until I started to work on it myself and started to really think about it, and really what ultimately changed things was saying that rather than adapting just The Hobbit as the 1936 novel, we would be, taking the appendices, the notes that Tolkien wrote, much later on, where he was connecting The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and to treat these as three movies that are basically going to lead into the three Lord of the Rings films.
The overhead shots look the most strange, as if they were like miniatures stuck on a green screen. Even though the landscape New Zealand is completely real, the pacing is what we were not used to at all, and all the creatures look different. But when it comes down to it, The Hobbit was written as a bedtime story fairy tale in 1937, while The Lord of the Rings was published in 1954 as more of a war adventure story. So if they were to stay true to the books by fans' discretion, they had to keep the talking trolls and the singing goblin. The extended edition of The Unexpected Journey had a lot of cool scenes that could have been kept in. Most of these scenes actually contained a lot of character development or were scenes straight out of the book that could have replaced the filler scenes that added completely nothing. This includes a scene from Desolation of Smaug when they first meet Bjorn, which explains why Gandalf had the dwarves meet at Bilbo's house 2 at a time in the very beginning, which they didn't explain in the book at all. Although personally I thought they did the beginning perfectly, introducing all of the dwarves and the personalities of the characters, and it didn't really seem forced, but it did feel like as they were going to never leave the Shire. So most complaints reviewers have is all the filler that was added, and I do agree with most of it. The things that were added didn't really have a use to the story and messed with the pacing a lot, which made the critics get a bit more negative reviews. But as critically bashed as it was, most of the audience really liked it. Most of the pacing issues could probably put to blame on Radagast, I could probably make an entire video explaining why Radagast is almost completely irrelevant, but Sylvester McCoy played an amazing Radagast, so I'll let it go this time. While watching these movies, I tried as hard as I could not to compare this to The Lord of the Rings, but when you have the same directors, writers, and production company to do it, then it's kind of impossible not to. Did we honestly want to see Tom Bombadil and Goldberry talk about trees for an hour, and did we honestly want to hear Treebeard talk for 3 chapters straight? I didn't think so. The Lord of the Rings movie adaptations had much unneeded filler and backstory, which made the pacing perfect for the amazing fantasy adventure that it was. I'm not saying take away the filler scenes in The Hobbit completely, just cut them down so they don't act as filler scenes and actually contribute to the movement of the story. Actually, now that I think about it, you could probably take out all of Radagast's backstory and most of the scenes that he's in, because you know Gandalf had already mentioned him as foreshadowing before, and him showing up wouldn't be that surprising. The White Council and Gandalf's side adventure makes for like a really cool subplot, because you never get to see what Gandalf was doing in the book. Take Mockingjay Part 1 for example, which, if you've seen it. The best part of that movie, extracting Peeta from the capital, wasn't even described in the book. I mean, it was described, but you couldn't visualize it as they didn't explain what exactly was going on. I'm mostly fine with Azog being the villain, but considering in Tolkien lore he died decades before The Hobbit, and considering his son, Bolg, he was actually in the book and was in the next 2 movies, I mean, why not make it completely canon and make Bolg the main villain, because you know Bolg was actually at the Battle of the 5 Armies. Either way, they needed a central villain for the first movie other than the Goblin King. My absolute favorite part of the movie was practically any scene with Bilbo as the focus, because Martin Freeman's performance and portrayal of how Bilbo is described in the book is completely spot on. He was what I enjoyed the most about these movies, even if he was barely in the last movie. I mean, these movies are called The Hobbit, so he should probably be in there somewhere. The Riddles in the Dark scene was just really perfect and exactly what I imagined from the book, even though I hadn't read the books before the movies came out of Lord of the Rings and before Andy Serkis's performance of Gollum, so I couldn't really imagine anything but Andy Serkis' performance. And other than unneeded filler scenes, backstory, and a little bit of prolonged battle scenes, I thought Unexpected Journey was super fun and adventurous movie to watch. I actually enjoyed this film a lot more while watching it at home and not in the theater. Sitting on your couch instead of sitting in a theater for almost 3 hours adds to the enjoyment, and the effects that they put in the world weren't really distracting anymore. I felt as though I got sucked into Middle-earth again, and you should come at these movies with a chill vibe, and I think anyone will enjoy them a lot more. Okay, can we also talk about the ending fire battle force scene, which is taken from the book aside from Azog being there and Thorin being like, you know, I'm about to go ham, and then he just gets completely owned. Did they honestly have to have the eagles save them again? After saving them in Lord of the Rings already, I feel like it's sort of Tolkien's excuse to resolve a, you know, a back against the wall sort of scenario. Desolation of Smaug continues in the next part.